Welcome to Deep Dives into the Bible, where we take our time and go deeply into God's Word. I am Father Michael Nasser from St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We are here with members of our St. Nicholas family and happy you've joined us. Here's today's conversation. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind, the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of thy gospel teachings. Implant in us also the fear of the blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things as are well pleasing unto thee. For thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and unto thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father, who is everlasting, and then all holy and good and life-giving Spirit, now and ever to the ages of ages. Amen. All right, I apologize because there was something I wanted to share at the beginning, and I thought, I wonder if I said this already. So I might have, but I didn't have a chance to go back and listen to see if it's true. Did we talk about how the passion narratives fit into the rest of the story at all?
The passion and what?
The narratives, the Jesus's, arrest and all that. Did we talk about that? All right. Well, if you don't remember, then it's not just me. All right. So the main thing I wanted to say was that when we hear different parts of the Gospels and we hear them separately, I think subconsciously we hear them under a certain category. So if it's the Beatitudes, we go, oh, this is Jesus's teaching, so we're going to learn about his teaching there. And then if it's a miracle story, well, we're going to hear about what Jesus can do. And now we get into the narrative of we've had his arrest. Now he's going to go for his trials, eventually his torture and crucifixion, then the resurrection. I think sometimes because we hear it separately, we tend to hear it under the category of what happened, because there's a lot of detail, right? These chapters, it's almost like, and you get this more in Mark's gospel, where it's just really rapid fire. And then all of a sudden you get to sort of our Holy Week time and everything gets stretched out. You get a lot more detail. It's the biggest amount of text that's divided to any one period of Jesus' earthly life. But I think if we inadvertently change the category, then we forget that it's not only just Jesus' teaching. I think we talked about that a little bit, that Jesus is still teaching by what he's doing. But in terms of Matthew's intent hasn't changed. Matthew has a purpose, an overall purpose that he has for writing his gospel, and that hasn't changed. We talked way back in the beginning when we started studying Matthew about what the overall themes of the book, or what he's trying to accomplish, what Matthew's trying to accomplish. Anybody remember any of those bigger sort of themes? Why is Matthew writing it, and why is it so important for us? Any remembrance of that?
You said in the past, according to my notes, I'm just really quickly checking, Matthew wrote his gospel as a whole. He wrote as one connected story, not one chapter and verse, all in context. Preceding verse, Last Supper, the coming crucifixion, Pascha, new Passover, not just rescuing Jews from bondage from Egypt, but saving all of us from the bondage of sin.
Good. Yeah, that's a great one. That's one of the themes that Matthew specifically tells his story, because Matthew's story is very much Jesus as the new Moses, right? He goes to Egypt from the land of Canaan. He comes out of Egypt and eventually leads his people out of bondage, although of course now it's a different kind of bondage. So that's one of those kind of themes. And so in that regard, with that specific example, what we're going to see is something that Matthew has been talking about since chapter 1 and all throughout. All right, so that's a great example. Thank you for that, Susie. Other things we've talked about are Jesus is going to emphasize not just external actions, but internal motivation, the condition of the heart, His railing against hypocrisy. It's not just about lying, it's about being one thing on the outside and a different thing on the inside. So again, just to keep our view as broad as we can so that we don't inadvertently close off and go, okay, let's look at now, we're looking at the end of chapter 26, and let's hear it in the frame we always have. We've had the blessing to be able to spend, dozens of hours looking at Matthew from a deep level, but also we try to keep connected to the whole picture, the whole book, because that's what any author does. He's trying to tell a story. She's trying to tell a story from beginning to end. That story has twists and turns, but there's one thing they want to leave you with, or at least one set of understanding. So again, just to keep the view broad as we go further into what's happening with Jesus.
I have in my notes, scripture is instructional.
Yeah. So this is not just, again, what happened or what is Jesus teaching. Isn't that nice? He's a good teacher. We like his teaching. It's how are we going to live? So, and we may have made this point before, but it bears repeating. Jesus is teaching us throughout, including teaching us by what he's going to go through. In other words, we may not be betrayed in the same way, but we suffer betrayal. We may not be arrested. We may not be falsely charged in a court, but people slander us and they say things that aren't true. We may not be whipped and mocked with a reed and with a crown of thorns, but people make fun of us. They may not kill us, but they try to hurt us sometimes. And again, Jesus is saying, like he said all the way throughout, remember back in the Sermon on the Mount, you have read this, but I tell you this. And he's deepened the teaching of the Old Testament, adding on what I would call sort of the gospel of love. It's the gospel of that has no limits to it. There's no limits. It's not an eye for an eye, right? It was an eye for an eye before. That's just. Now it's, forgive your brother 70 times 7. So all this is we want to make sure we're not just focusing in on what is sort of intriguing to us, and it should be intriguing to us that what Jesus does, but never stopping, like you said, that this is all instructional. He's teaching us. And therefore, if we're going to be disciples of Jesus, we're going to learn and practice living like he lives. You can't call yourself a disciple of anybody, right? No matter who. It could be a fitness teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a professor. You can't say you're a disciple, but not do what they do. They're there to teach you, and you're there to learn, and that's why you've, in a sense, chosen them to be the teacher. So the disciple is not the one that says, oh, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I don't like what he says, and I'll pick this, I'll pick that. No, a follower of Jesus does what he does, which is why for us the saints are the ultimate example of Christians, because they do what he does. Some of them literally, in fact, the majority of them literally going to their death out of their devotion to him. Any other thoughts or questions on that before we dig in? All right, so we are in chapter 26. We're towards the end. Will somebody read for us? Let's look at 57 to 68. Be shy.
And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at least 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of God sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, He is deserving of death. They spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?
Okay, thank you, Alan. So there's going to be a lot of detail, and like anything in the scripture, detail is always important. It was not put in there just as filler. Every part of this is really for our understanding or instruction. So Jesus had just been arrested. That we looked at that last week, or the week was it last week? Yeah, or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Yeah. I was gonna say it seems like a long time. So where are they taking him and why?
Well, they needed to come up with some reason to get rid of him because they wanted people to not follow him.
Yeah, and who's the they?
The Jews.
Yeah.
And the false witnesses who said what Christ said, but nobody understood that he meant that himself as the temple.
Right.
They're thinking of the actual physical temple that's there.
Yep.
And because of that, then they thought, well, he's telling all these untruths, we have to get rid of him.
Yeah. So he's going to Caiaphas, the high priest, because, and we're going to see that there are a lot of co-conspirators in this. There's going to be a lot of folks that are going to have a hand in Jesus is going to his death. But the way that Matthew is telling the story that we need to understand is it's the religious leaders that are leading this charge, right? And we've seen this coming. We've heard the scribes and the Pharisees, trying to catch him in his talk and all those things that we saw them trying to do. So it's the religious leaders that have gathered together. They take him to Caiaphas, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. So why are they gathering? They've sent out the guards to go arrest him, and they are, in a sense, the trial.
So is this an actual one, or is this like a kangaroo court?
It's a good question. I've always wondered, did the religious leaders act in this way? Was this a regular thing? And my sense is no. I don't think that this was a regular thing. Like now, the religious leaders would sit in judgment over cases, but you would go to the rabbi, you'd go to whoever the religious leader was, they would hear the case. But I think, and this is a good point when you brought it up, I think this is unusual in the sense that they've all gathered for this. This is
in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's not legit.
Right. It's not only is not legit, they're going out of their way to do something that, as Matthew is writing the story, we can say this was not the act of a few. This was not some religious leaders turning on him. This was his religion turning on him. It was all these leaders gathered together, and not just that, different factions and different people. So you have not just the scribes or not just the elders, you have them together. And there's, if you think about earlier, the different interactions Jesus had, sometimes with the Pharisees, sometimes with the Sadducees. So this is really all of them gathering together. And I don't think, we could look into this, but I don't think that was a normal thing. I can't even imagine how it would be.
Yeah,
Like, what would rise to that level?
Right.
But, and I think this is why it unfolds this way. Who did this? It was that entire system. It wasn't an individual, it wasn't a group. And yeah, it's in the middle of the night. Part of that is what you see going on. There's a lot of manipulation, right? And people love, you hear the sermon, all the time. People love to talk about how the same people that said Hosanna on Sunday are saying crucify him on Friday, and because it's dramatic, right? This big shift.
Well, and people like to be part of the group, part of the crowd.
But I'm not so sure that a lot of that wasn't actually showing the tension between Jesus as, in a sense, a man of the people, right? Why is he dangerous? Because the people are flocking to him. The religious leaders are the ones going, we got to get rid of him. You don't see this among the people until it's the religious leaders going, we're going to go. And that's why you'll see this, where it says, now the chief priests and the whole council sought false testimony. Right? This is not just, hey, does anybody have anything to say? The judges, this is the kangaroo court part of it, the judges in this case have gone out and tried to find people who will testify, and they're going to testify falsely. And yet, even in the kangaroo court, in the middle of the night, with this conspiracy going on, they couldn't find anybody.
Well, and one thought that has occurred to me in this one is like, are you king of the Jews? Well, he knew that he was going to be the king of the universe, but he never said that.
Right.
Well, and we have to be careful to distinguish, and I've listened a little bit to Eugenie.
Constantino.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
who's excellent,
Yeah.
especially on, well, the only part of her that I've heard is on this whole section where you look at the practices of the Jewish leaders and compare them to the Roman leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jewish leaders have a problem. They are under the legal structure of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot sentence somebody to death.
Right.
They are looking for something that will allow him to do that,
Yeah.
because he is a huge problem, and there's a multitude of reasons. I mean, if you really look at what Jesus says, and you don't believe he's the Son of God, he is a huge problem, and they have to do something. And so they're looking for two things. They're looking for justification in their own religion, and blasphemy is a charge for death, but they're also looking for something to bring him to the Roman authorities, saying this man deserves to die.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On both accounts, this is difficult, right? Achieving either one of these would be hard.
Well, achieving that he's claiming to be the Son of God, I mean, he clearly said things that were over the line.
Yeah, but you see how hard it is for them.
Yeah.
They try to get all these false witnesses. They finally find someone who says something that isn't false, right? So they tried to do it in a false way. It didn't work, which you'd say, well, how hard can that be? But we're going to see. What's that?
Go ahead. I was going to say something. Go ahead.
No, go
finish.
ahead. Go ahead.
The Orthodox Study Bible says his claim to be God is the real reason the high priest sentenced him. Not just that he is the Son of God, but he's claiming to be God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had no concept that we would have, let's say, of the Trinity, that the divinity Jesus has. So they've got him, they have to get him to somehow say the blasphemy, which is that, yes, he's God.
Yeah.
Right, that's the blasphemy. But so they try the false way, which should have been fairly easy. Like, make up a story, find some people to corroborate it, done. And it didn't work. Now they find somebody who says something true, right? Jesus did say he's able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And I think, okay, we've got him, right? What does Jesus do? Verse 63, he's silent. He could have incriminated himself at that point and just said, yes, I said that. All right, case closed. He's not going to do anything until they back him into a corner. And they've done everything in a sense to take on the responsibility. They tried to do it by cheating. They tried to do it by this true statement, and he didn't take the bait. He didn't say, yes, I said that. Now the high priest says to him, I adjure you by the living God. What does that mean? I adjure you by the living God.
Was that like an oath, like a swearing by?
Yeah. So what does it mean to swear by something?
Well, it's like you have to tell the truth, right?
Why?
Well, if you say, I swear by the living God that I'm telling you the truth, and if you lie, then you're damning yourself. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So the person, if the oath that you say to somebody, put your hand on the Bible, swear to the whole truth, nothing but the truth. There are two agreements, two covenants that are going on there. The easier one is that if the person lies, they're doing so not just lying about what they're talking about, they're lying against the God by putting their hand on the Bible, whatever it happens to be. What's the other covenant that makes that oath powerful? So we have the oath, the covenant between the person and the God, the person testifying in God. Who's putting the Bible in the hand of the person, and what does that mean?
Authority of some kind?
The person, the high priest in this case.
Right. The high priest is saying, I have a covenant with God, and by that same God, I want you to swear. It's not in here in the words, but the assumption has to be there. If the high priest doesn't, in a sense, believe in God, that God is God, asking Jesus to testify, I adjure you by the living God to tell us, then it really has no meaning. It's like me saying, I wrote the Gospel of Gobbledygook, and I know it's nothing, but I say to you, swear by the Gospel of Gobbledygook. It doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't. There's no weight to it. It only has weight if these two assumptions, I'm calling it covenant, so you could call it an assumption, between God and the person, in a sense, administering the oath, and the person taking the oath. All right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I don't know if this happens in court anymore, but when you put your hand on the Bible, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I'm not sure that
I don't
happens.
think they do that anymore.
But they used to put a Bible.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the God was the one who believed, in more modern times.
Yeah.
I'm not saying current times, but in essence, if it's the rabbi, the chief priest in Jesus's time, when we followed that practice, was it in our government in essence?
Acknowledging God.
Of course.
Yes,
Right. Because if it means nothing, why do it?
Right.
exactly.
If it's put your hand on the comic book, that we get it. Intuitively, we know that's a stupid thing to do. Swear on the comic book. It's only valid, or as you said before, it only has weight if the person issuing the oath and the person taking the oath both value that agreement. Right? And in this case, in the court case, it's the Bible as the visible representative of the truth of God. Right? So hand on the Bible, or in this case, there's no other than what's he swearing by the living God himself. There's no, you cannot make a stronger statement. I adjure you by the living God, tell us.
I have a question, because my translation says, I put you under oath. Does the high priest, who is, a lot of rules are, he's governed by a lot of rules in the Torah. Is there something in there that gives him specifically authority to demand the truth?
He's the highest representative. He's the patriarch. He's the pope, right? He's the chief rabbi or whatever the highest Jewish authority is. But he is the highest physical, the person that has the most ability to represent God.
Father,
Yeah.
something else that struck me. as Catherine is mentioning, that the rabbi or chief priest is saying, you know, I put you under oath by the living God.
Yeah.
You know, we believe he's living. We believe what Father David last night in our class at parish night spoke about. It's not created. We're still we're all still being created. You know, things are still being created. So in our church, when you go through Holy Week, you're saying this isn't past. We're living it now. So I didn't recognize that living God mentioned in the Bible like that the Jews believed. What is that? They do believe he is alive.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Currently living. He's not past. He's
Of
not.
course.
Yeah. So I mean, that's our belief.
Right. Yeah, and to your point, he couldn't have raised the stakes any higher. He could say, by the scriptures, by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, by the living God is the God who is active now. Right? Isn't it where does it say it's a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the living God? I think it's the Hebrews, I can't remember. Yeah. So this is the living immediate presence of God, right? The living God. And what the chief priests say, if you look at this as a gambling image, he's anteing up. He's saying, I adjure you by the living God, who, if that relationship wasn't important to me, there's no meaning behind making Jesus swear by something that the oath administerer doesn't think is valuable. So he's anteed in, right? So
That's as high as he can go.
as high as he can go, and he's forcing Jesus by the one thing that if Jesus agrees with to do it, because he's saying, I adjure by the living God, in some sense, that's why Jesus is doing it. He's now, because the high priest has anteed up, now Jesus, in a sense, has to, because he's saying, I adjure by the living God. But what I want you to get is they're both now in the game, right? They've both got a bet on the table. It's not just, Jesus, you take on the risk of taking this oath. I don't have any risk. The high priest is now anteing into the highest degree. He's going all in, saying, here's my bet. But what you get is he's now in it, right? So someone is going to lose. Now, if we keep reading, you'd say, well, Jesus loses, right? Because he's the one that ends up getting beaten, as they already were before in this section, right? In verse 67, 68. But that's going to be the ultimate question of Matthew in this part of the story is, who's the winner, who's the loser? It looks like Jesus lost the bet, because Jesus, at that point, he does say to him, look at 64, you have, my translation says, you have said so. What does yours say?
It is as you said.
It is as you said, yeah. If anybody ever tells you that Jesus never claimed to be the Son of God, this is one of those places. He doesn't do it very often. But this is one of the places he's very clearly saying, I am. Yeah.
Is there any possibility that Jesus's accusers do believe that he is the Son of God?
Doesn't seem so.
But not afraid to say so, not accepting it, but somewhere deep inside they think maybe that he is, and that scares them.
Well, not in Matthew, but you're going to see in other gospels that Nicodemus, there are secret followers.
Joseph of Arimathea.
People who are on the fence.
Right. But you can see how this plays out. There's really going to be no room to be on the fence. Jesus is going to lead this process. I mean, here he is, the ultimate victim. He's been arrested. He's now being spat upon and slapped. But he's setting this up to basically tell everybody, you're on one side or the other. You know, do you remember the story of Moses? I read this a couple days ago. When Moses goes up the mountain, the people make the golden calf, and he comes down, and what does he say? Remember?
can't remember the word.
Pick your side.
Oh, okay.
If you're with God, come over here. If you're not, go over there.
Well, and they thought he was gone so long that they needed to have something to worship.
Right.
They thought he wasn't.
They thought they could stand in the middle. And so from Moses' time all the way through, and Jesus is doing the same thing, in Revelation, he's going to say, be hot or cold. There's no lukewarm. There's no middle ground. Right? So this process, Jesus, even though he appears to be the victim, no power, what he's driving is to say, I'm going to give you every chance to be on the right side of this. Remember Judas and the kiss and why are you here, friend, all that. Now he's not answering the charges, even when they say something true. He doesn't say it until now this oath has been administered. And Jesus says, as it is as you have said, or as Mike says, you have said so. And now he's going to say very clearly, he's now giving them every chance. Now it's going to be, he's going to lay it out. I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven.
In this Bible,
Mm-hmm.
power is capitalized.
Yeah. Let me see if that's
Mine too. You have the same.
Greek. I don't think does the same thing with capitals, but I'll look and just see. It doesn't always have the same.
So is that another word for God the Father?
Yeah, I think
or-
that's the illusion. Let's see if it has. What verse is that?
64.
64. Yeah, it's a capital. So in the liturgy we hear the dynamis, right? Sing it again with strength. These the dynamos, like come with the right hand of the power. Yeah. So I'll read it to you literally. It's funny. Think about how English works. 64. If you are the Christ, Son of God, Jesus says to him, you said it. Right? Suapis, like you're saying this. Right? He's not saying like I will tell you that. He said, you're saying. It's literally only 2 words. Like you have said so, or it is as you have said. In Greek, it's 2 words. You said. Right? It doesn't need the pronoun it, it's implied. So it's literally you're saying this. But I say to you, right? You said that, but I say to you, this says, interesting. From now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right the right. It doesn't have the noun there, right? It's on the right of the power, is how it reads literally. You can see
Like
how
the
hard it is to lay out English. Like to read this literally, I'll read to you actually as the words say it. You said, but I say to you, from now you will see the Son of Man sitting at right of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Right? It's just very hard. Now you've got to fill in words to make it make sense in English. What was that, Rick?
I was going to say, it's like the song we sing in the choir, The Power of Heaven.
Yes.
I think that's.
Yeah, now the powers. Yeah. Although in that sense, typically, when we talk about powers, usually we're talking about the angels, but it's the angels as the ministers around the throne. Right. But in this sense, this would be, the prince. The one who sits to the right of the king is the prince. That's the sense. Right hand of power.
So the way I see this is the chief priest is trying to get Jesus to admit to blasphemy.
Mm-hmm. Well, his version of blasphemy.
Well, and Jesus says that's what Jesus basically says it is as you say, or however you want
Right.
to translate it. And not only that, you're in big trouble because you're gonna see the way power is truly laid out.
Maybe the you're in trouble. I don't know if that's necessarily there, but you're in trouble in the sense that you think you have power. Well, here's what real power is going to look like.
Yes.
Yes, you're going to see real power. Is he telling him you're on the wrong side? I don't. It's yeah, you can make the case, but yeah, and even the you have said so. Who uttered the blasphemy?
Please.
Yeah. Right? Now, he said it as a question. I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus is not even given, in a sense, the dignity of saying, I am the Son of God. He's going to try and go, those words came out of your mouth, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
You said it. Right? But, again, Jesus is not going to hold back from words coming out of his mouth that would have been thought blasphemy by the chief priests and the others. But Jesus is telling the truth, right? You said that. Yeah, you're right. You said it. But I'm going to also add hereafter, right? And think of the irony of this. He refers himself to, did you say son of man or son of God?
Son of man.
Okay. So
Alluding to Daniel, I assume.
Daniel has that son of man reference, but Jesus in Matthew very commonly calls himself the Son of Man. You know, he refers to himself in the third person. He does that Trump thing of when Trump says Trump, you know, it's funny. So he says, hereafter, you're going to see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Who? This guy that you got bound up in front of you, that you arrested in the dark of night, and that you're about to do these horrible things just, you know, a minute later. That's the one you're going to see.
And it makes me want to jump ahead in the story after Christ died, and one of the men below him said, truly, this was the Son of God.
Yes. Yes. One of the co-conspirators.
Right.
Right? The Roman.
Imagine though, and I think a lot of people can be guilty of this, including me. Imagine you're the high priest, and you have this man coming before you, telling you what he's telling you. Whoever told you that before? What other man ever uttered those words in your whole life?
Mm-hmm.
And it did not give them pause. Those elders, those chief priests, and what was in the whole council, didn't give one of them pause to think, because why? What would block them from stepping back a moment and really critically analyzing what this man was saying? All they wanted to do was murder him. That was their goal. And this has happened throughout society and throughout history, where you get so literally hell-bent on believing something about someone, and you can be so wrong. And I'll just give an example. In the news, Richard Jewell with the Atlanta and the bombing. And they were crucifying this man and so certain that he indeed was guilty. And of course, he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But that these rabbis would not just stop and think, what is he saying? All they could think is, he's blaspheming. But the reason is always there. And the reason Catherine was approaching it when she was mentioning, and you said too, Father, two things, you know, religion and, you know, he was a king, declaring, you know, a king, and that would be against Rome. But it was the threat, the problem that Catherine kept saying, if he is a problem, he's a problem. He was a threat to their authority and a threat to their power. And therefore, you will not make way for any reason if that is your motivation for putting an end to someone. And we still see it today in society, and we see it in history.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We see it there. But again, for our purposes in Matthew, we may not be ones that would be so blatant in our rejection of God. Like, we can't read ourselves into the story here. But what Matthew's going to do, as he finishes his story, that by the end of the story, you may not have been somebody that you can imagine being either the chief priest or one of the other religious leaders. Maybe you could put yourself in the place of the disciples who all forsook him and fled. But somewhere along the line, you're going to be able, if you're not, like you said, hell bent on protecting yourself in one way or another, you're going to go, yeah, I could have done that. I could have done that. Because I think if we don't say that, then we've now taken ourselves out of the story, right? Matthew's not telling us a good story to entertain us. He's saying, I want to tell you about the Christ that you can follow. And to follow him is to be on the right side when you get to these decision points, right? Peter has already ended up on the wrong side, although he hasn't ended up, thankfully, right? Judas literally ended up on the wrong side. Peter, as of this moment, is on the wrong side, right? Go back to 58. Peter followed him at a distance, as far as the court of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end, right? He didn't just run away and go, forget Jesus, I'm not putting myself at risk. He's denied him, but now he's also putting himself somewhat in harm's way because now he's around. But why is there? He's there to see the end. So he's conflicted. And I think we have to make sure that we see ourselves in here, because if we don't see ourselves, what are we going to learn, right?
At this point, because next sections are Peter's 3 to 9. So
Oh, that's right. Sorry, yeah, you're
no,
right.
but he was still distancing himself further. Right.
Yeah, they did. Let me go back.
I
Make
think
sure I get it
it's
right.
because he was afraid of.
Yeah.
And any of us could be in, a situation like that.
Yeah, so you're right. He hasn't denied him, but he's fled.
But,
Go back to 56. And all the disciples forsook him and fled. I think that all is instructive. It's not just like, well, some did, they all did. And so when you're going to see that at some point, everybody either caused this or at least is somewhat complicit in it going through. But you're going to see also, before the story is over, the redemption of those who, even after either betraying him or not betraying, but fleeing from him, there's going to be a way back. And again, I think that's a key part of what Matthew's going to teach throughout the whole thing. Somebody say something?
Since my childhood, I was always amazed how they could love him on Palm Sunday and then kill him days later.
Yeah.
And it was the crowd too initiating it. And so we might not be the chief priest, but we might be putting ourselves in that crowd.
Yeah.
They probably spread the news that he said that he was the Son of God, and then people turn on him.
Right. I mean, I think some people, in the process of him coming into Jerusalem and not kicking out the Romans, they may have even on that day said, oh, he's here, Hosanna. Well, why is Rome? It's Monday now. Why is Rome still here? Where's Jesus? He left the city? He didn't attack? Like, what's his donkey? So, yeah, I think you're right, Susie. Although I think what is clear in Matthew especially is the crowds aren't initiating it, but the crowds are in a sense susceptible to what they're being told. And I think, again, that's a good warning for us. You're going to hear things. Be careful what you hear. I remember after January 6th, one of the message I wanted to give was never join a mob. Mobs are bad, right? And there were two mobs. There was the mob that stormed the Capitol, and there's a mob that immediately, because they hated Trump, are like, well, he tried to overthrow the government. We're not going to get into that whole debate. But mobs on both sides. It's easy to be, and when you're caught up, you're outsourcing your decision making to somebody else, and even to a group. I remember when I was a camp counselor, there was this kid that was a very difficult kid, and a couple of counselors, when I went, and they just did some horrible things, almost as an act of revenge against this little 11 or 12-year-old. And we try to figure out how could they have possibly been so mean. It was like they got caught up in it. It wasn't one person going, let's do this, and they all follow. It was like Oh, that kid makes me crazy. Yeah, he makes me crazy too. He did that. And then they just stirred themselves up as a mob. So, yeah, I
Just
think,
gets out of hand. There's no. Once you start entertaining that thought of the sin, whether you're aware of it or not, you don't have control.
Right.
Of it, you just gotta.
right. Yeah. Okay, so Jesus, he says what he says to the high priest. Then the high priest tore his robes and says, he has uttered blasphemy. Anybody know why Jewish people tear their robes?
Good question.
It's a sign of something, but I don't know what it means.
Usually grief, death.
Okay.
You're
Wrenching.
yes, you're showing the tearing apart of what death does, and they would tear the robe.
So he's saying that he should be dead.
Yeah, it's not really clear. He doesn't say why, but
You're done. You're dead.
yeah,
You're dead
you're
to
dead to
us.
me. Yeah. He has uttered blasphemy. Why do we still need witnesses, right? He's like, okay, we got him. Let's get this moved on. And you're going to see they have, well, you know, like Kathy was saying, there's more they've got to do. But they've got now the first move. They've got him to be guilty in their view of blasphemy.
And it says in the notes here that the priest understood his claim of equality with God. And that's when
Yeah.
it's like, this isn't, it's just not gonna, that's not
Right.
true. That's
Yeah.
not it. Yeah. And it says it was punishable by death.
Yeah.
So they had what they came for.
Yeah. And then now they're just going to keep, in a sense, doubling down. They've charged, you know, what is your judgment? He deserves death. Then they spat in his face. That's bad enough. They struck him. That's bad enough. And now they're going to mock his claim that if any prophesy to us, you Christ, who is it that struck you? So they're going to call him the Christ, but it's in mocking. Right. And again, I think Susie said this earlier, like how far people will go. If you have an idea, they're going all in to say, you know, we're going to even use his supposed blasphemy against him and literally hit him with that.
Plus I think they were thinking about what happened a few days earlier with the people greeting Christ coming in, and they're all saying, Hosanna in the highest, praising him as the Messiah. But they had to convince them that this is a false Messiah who committed blasphemy, and we've got the proof from his own mouth.
Right.
So that's how they turn the crowd, you know, in their favor with this story, I think.
Right. Yep. I'll read you a couple of quotations in this section. This is from St. Jerome on Peter following distance. Either out of a disciple's love or out of human curiosity, Peter wanted to know what judgment the high priest would make concerning the Lord, whether he would have Christ put to death or beaten with whips. There is a difference between the 11 apostles and Peter at this point. They fled, whereas he followed the Savior from a distance. So he's giving him a little bit of credit for, yes, he fled, but he's circling around. And he doesn't even determine, was it out of love or just was he curious?
Go back to 65 where it taught, you said tore his clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking that is grief, and just like the greatest extent of that tearing. Do you think he knew it was blasphemy, but at the same time, was he hoping that he would have answered something else that that it pained the high priest when he said that?
Everything about this tells us the opposite. Right? He's going to such lengths. He tried false witnesses, that didn't work. He brought somebody with the accusation of what he said it was true. That didn't work. Now he's putting himself all in to say, I adjure you by the living God. I'm putting myself on the line with God. Here's the bet. Are you going to take up that bet? So I think everything around this says the opposite. I look at this as in basketball, when the guy's dribbling in and he just grazes the defender shoots himself back and falls on the floor, right? And sometimes gets the ref to fall for it. It's like he's going to go over and above to go, look what he said. You heard it yourself, right? And he's doing it even listen to this, before they agree, right? He didn't say, okay, you've heard it. What do you all say? He deserves death. I agree, right? I got him. I look at this as the opposite, where there's nothing redeeming about his actions. He had
Okay.
every
Okay,
opportunity.
I was just wondering,
Yeah.
there could have been, but Tor, it was like, I'm done, that's what I needed.
Yes. Yeah, but I think there's even a little bit of a show.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's just we're all reading in a little bit, but
Okay,
yeah. But that's on the level of sort of what his goal is. That makes sense, right? He's trying to. This is a show trial. It's a kangaroo court, and yet on the literal level, who declares Jesus to be the Son of God?
The high priest.
The high priest does. And who literally mourns his death that he's going to send him to? The high priest. So on a literal level, not necessarily on his heart, but and even when they're going to slap him and say, prophesy to us, who was that struck you? They're calling him the Christ. On a literal level, there's nothing that you can say where they kind of halfway through here. Like, we want that, right? Some of us, we all want to see what redeemable quality, what little inkling. And that's where Jerome is saying, well, okay, Peter followed. Was it out of love or just human curiosity? We can't tell, right? We want to give, in a sense, the benefit of the doubt. But I think the story is playing out that there's no doubt.
I think we have mixed motivations. I can see Peter doing it out of love and curiosity and horror and fear. Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah, his is vague. He's forsook him and fled, but he's sort of around watching. And Jerome picks up on that. Again, I think that's our desire of going, come on, people, like, do you know what's going on here? Right? You read the Old Testament and it's like I've been reading Exodus the last couple of weeks. And as you read the book, it happens so quickly. It's like they go through the Red Sea. They've just literally walked on dry land with an ocean on each side. And then like a day later, they're complaining, why did you bring us out here? We could have had food in Egypt. And so you read it. And again, I think our temptation is say, those people, what's wrong with them? How could they do this? But if we look at it honestly, can we see ourselves somewhat, maybe not as drastically, maybe not as completely, but I think if we read it honestly, we go, yeah, I can't stand in judgment over them. But I think why do we want to do this? Why do we want to give them the benefit of a doubt? I think in a way we do see ourselves here. And we want some redeeming quality to the things that we do. Let me read you one more quick quote, then we'll wrap up here. This is interesting. It's actually also from St. Jerome. This is Caiaphas tearing his robes. The one whom fury had lifted out of his priestly throne was impelled by that same fury to tear his garments. When Caiaphas tore his robes, he demonstrated that the Jews had lost the glory of the priesthood and that the seat of the high priest was now vacant. But it is the custom of the Jews to tear their clothes when they hear any blasphemy against God. We read that Paul and Barnabas did this when they were honored and worshipped as gods in Lycaonia. So that's more directly about this being blasphemy, not just grief, but it's the horror of the blasphemy that's caused this.
So did Caiaphas stop being the priest then? Or did
You hear a lot of this, like trying to, and these are of course Christian writers trying to say how did we get here? How did we get to be the Christian church? And to some degree, what they're trying to describe is Judaism stopped being the people of God. The Christians would say, as St. Paul says, spends a lot of time talking about, we are the root grafted off of that stem of the people of Israel. But there's a lot of stuff. In fact, it's a little bit controversial because some people would read that and go, well, that's anti-Semitic. Right? It sounds to our modern ears that anything about the Jews stop being these things, sounds to us sometimes as anti-Semitic. A friend of mine did his paper on the hymns of Holy Week and the anti-Semitic overtones. Because it's always about the Jews did this and the Jews did this and the God-hating Jews and the Jews abandoned him, but the real followers of Christ do this. So depending what your context is, it can sound anti-Jewish. But what he's trying to say is what God was doing with this group, they left. God didn't leave them, they left. And, well, some of them left. And the ones that didn't leave, when they saw God literally appearing, continued their faith, which is why, for decades after what's going on here, these followers of Jesus are still going to be going to synagogue. They're still going to go to the temple. Because there's this idea of Jesus has fulfilled the law, but he didn't start anything new. And what we know of as Christianity only starts in full when the Jews fully excommunicate the Christians. So there's a little bit of back and forth. We were talking about this in our intro to Orthodoxy class. The Christians are going to go to synagogue, they're going to go to the temple, but then they're also going to gather in the homes, they're going to have the Eucharist. Right? So you see this in Acts, early chapters of Acts. Later on, only when the Jews say, you're out of the synagogue, you're out of the temple, you're not among us anymore. Then they're going to take what they knew of as their worship in Judaism and transfer it into this different, separate body. So if you go to the liturgy, for example, our liturgy, the first half is pretty basically what a Jew would have done going to synagogue. You say some prayers, you sing some hymns, you hear some scripture, you hear a homily, and then you go home. The second half is actually what they would have done to some degree if they went to temple. And especially temple at the time of Jesus, when the temple was actually still there. You go, you make your sacrifice, you confess your sins, you declare your truth, make your sacrifice. You go. So what continues in the Christian church only happens once they've actually kicked them out. But to go back to the quote, you're going to hear a lot of these early fathers talk about how they left. He talks about him. He got up out of this priestly throne. Right? It wasn't like he got kicked out. He left it in his betrayal of Christ. All right, we are out of time, but thank you, everybody. Next week we are not here, I believe. Is that correct? I believe we are not here because I am not here.
Well, that's
So-
good. Did hear before.
Date on that.
It'll be the February
6, I think.
6th.
Yeah. All right, have a good day and a good week, everybody.